the first, stone moved before she crossed the threshold. Not when she touched it. Not when she spoke to it. Before. While she was still a silhouette on the road. While the dust from her sandals hadn't yet reached my gates. The stone that forms the very base of this kingdom, the one I bled on the night I claimed this land. The one that has not shifted in 300 years, moved. I felt it through the soles of my feet. A vibration so old it didn't have a name in any language I'd learned. I was standing at the high window of the North Tower, watching her approach the way a surgeon watches a patient who doesn't yet know they're sick. And I felt my own kingdom tremble in a direction I had never given it permission to go. By the time she reached the second gate, 3 of my serpents had bowed their heads, not coiled, not defensive, bowed the way they bow to me. I had spent 3 centuries building this place into something that could not be taken from me. I had fed it my silence, my grief, my refusal to break. I had been the only thing it answered to. And now, a 12-year-old girl I had never seen in my life was walking toward my throne, and my kingdom was already making room. What do you do when the thing you built to protect yourself begins to choose someone else? What do you do when the answer isn't an enemy? It's something far more dangerous. Stay. Because what I found inside her changed everything I thought I knew about what I'd lost. If this story pulled you in, like the video and follow Medusa's Memories, tell us, what state are you listening from? I have ruled this kingdom for longer than any living person can remember ruling anything. That is not boasting. It is simply the thing that is true, the way stone is true, the way the cold at the center of the mountain is true, indifferent to whether you acknowledge it. Present, regardless of your attention. I have watched kings build empires and name them after their own vanity. I have watched those names become the words children use for rivers, for disasters, for things too large to mourn properly. I have outlasted all of it. I expected to outlast all of it still to come. I did not expect this. The morning she arrived. The sky over the eastern ridge was the color of old bronze, that particular shade that happens in late autumn when the light doesn't quite commit to gold and the clouds can't decide whether to stay or pass. I had been awake since before sunrise, as I usually am, sitting with the accounts of the southern granaries and the water reports from the lower terraces. There had been a drought, 3 seasons without adequate rain, and the older farmers were beginning to use the word my advisors had been carefully avoiding, omen. I don't believe in omens. I am, in certain technical senses, the omen other people's lives organize themselves around. But I understood what they meant by it, that nameless pressure that settles into a community when too many bad things happen too close together. When people start looking at the sky not with hope, but with a kind of tired accusation. My people had that look. I had been managing it carefully, calmly. The way I manage most things, by being present, consistent, and slightly colder than was strictly necessary so that my composure read as certainty rather than numbness. I was reviewing the 3rd report of the morning when the first knock came, not at the door of my study. This is important. Not a human knock, not the careful double rap of my advisors, who know better than to interrupt me before the morning briefing. This was a sound from below the floor, from the stone itself, deep and resonant, like the lowest note of an instrument too large for any room to hold. I felt it in my molars. I felt it in the places where my serpents root into the base of my skull. That ancient junction where my biology diverges from the merely human, and every one of them went still at once. They are never still all at once. I stood up from the table, The accounts fell. I didn't pick them up. By the time I reached the North Tower window, 2 floors up, facing the road that descends from the Illyrian Pass, I could already see her, small, darkihaire, wearing a traveling cloak that was at least 1 size too large, the hem dragging in the road dust. She was walking with the focused determination of someone who has been walking for a very long time and has learned to stop thinking about how much farther there is to go. Her head was down, her hands were at her sides. She wasn't looking at the kingdom, she was just moving toward it. My serpents turned their heads toward the road before I consciously registered the direction. That was the first thing. That was when I understood something was wrong. I watched her reach the first gate, the outer one. The one my guards are positioned to hold against a full army. Built from the black stones of the northern quarry that have an embedded resonance with my serpent's frequency. Anything that disturbs the stones disturbs them, and anything that disturbs them disturbs me. The gate has rejected merchant caravans, diplomatic envoys, petitioners with legitimate business. It is not welcoming. I designed it not to be. The gate opened, not because a guard opened it. My senior guard at the northern post, a woman named Delphi, who has served at that gate for 14 years and has the particular kind of unflappable composure I specifically hire for, told me afterward that she had not touched the mechanism. The counterweight system that requires 3 people to operate had simply released, as though something in the stone remembered how to welcome a guest and had decided to act on that memory without consulting me. The girl walked through without breaking stride. I am not a person who panics. I have seen things that would disassemble the sanity of most individuals, and I have catalogued them and kept moving. But standing at the window watching a child walk through my gate that has never opened on its own, in a kingdom that I have been the sole authority in for 3 centuries, I felt something under my sternum that I recognized with great discomfort as the early architecture of fear. I sent for Sito. Sito has been my head advisor for 40 years. She is the descendant of a long line of women who served this kingdom before me, who understood its particular nature, its geography, its laws, its older habits, the way one understands a relative who has been difficult for decades, with exhaustion and precision and a kind of weary love. She is not easily startled. She arrived in my study 7 minutes after I sent the summons, took one look at my expression, and said, without preamble, "What happened?" "There is a girl on the road," I said. The north gate opened for her. Sito's face went through a sequence of expressions I had never seen on it before. The first was simple surprise. The second was something more complicated, recognition, almost. The way a person looks when a word they've forgotten returns to them suddenly in a context where they'd rather not remember it. The third was careful blankness. She composed herself in the time it takes to blink, but I had been watching her face for decades. I saw all 3 send someone to intercept her, I said. Before the second gate, yes, Sito said. She did not move immediately. Seto, what does she look like? I described her, small, dark-haired, traveling cloak to large. 12 years old, perhaps 13. Walking with purpose, no visible companions. No cart, no pack animal, no obvious supplies for a journey of any distance. Whatever she was carrying on her person. Sito left without another word. I watched from the window. The girl reached the second gate, the inner one, the older one, the one built from the original foundation stones of this kingdom before I had resources for the northern quarry. When I was still building with what the mountain gave me. The stones of the second gate carry something different from the northern quarry stones. They carry the original compact. The agreement I made with this land when I claimed it, written not in any document, but in the specific frequency of the rock. In the way the minerals align under 3 centuries of my particular presence. Those stones have never responded to anyone but me. Before Sito's runner could reach her, the girl paused at the second gate. She turned and looked directly at it, not with the uncertainty of a stranger, not with the hesitation of someone calculating how to ask permission. She looked at it the way you look at a door in your own home, and she placed one hand, flat-palmed, on the foundation stone. The stone lit from within. That amber warmth, not fire, not magic in the theatrical sense. Just the particular resonance of old stone recognizing a frequency it has been waiting for. Traveled upward through the gate like a pulse through a vein. And in the wall beside the gate, the inscription carved there on the day. I completed the second wall. The words in the old language that only I know how to read became visible. I had not lit those words in 3 centuries. I had not needed to. They read, "Daughter of my daughter, the gate holds nothing against you." Those words were not part of the original inscription. I know the original inscription. I carved it. What was visible now was something older, something that had been underneath the stone all along, waiting for a specific pressure to reveal it. I stood at the window. My serpents had gone absolutely still, the way they go still in the presence of something they recognize but cannot name. The amber warmth in the stone faded. The girl's hand fell from the gate. The second gate opened. I pulled back from the window before she could look up and see me. "What was written?" Sito asked when she returned. I told her. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. "Who sent her?" I asked. Sito looked at her hands. "I don't know yet," she said. "But whoever they are, they knew about the secondary inscription. They knew what it would do." I didn't know about the secondary inscription. "No," Sito said. "You didn't." She looked up at me then, and her expression was the third one I'd seen earlier, the carefully blankened one. Except now, there was something underneath it that she couldn't quite hide, something that looked on a face as controlled as Sito's, almost like grief. "I need to check something," she said, "before we go further. There's a record in the old archive that I should have reviewed when you first described her. I should have thought of it immediately. Then, I'm sorry." I watched her go. I looked back out the window. The girl was already inside the second wall, being escorted by 2 of my guards, not under arrest, I noted, because the guards were walking beside her rather than flanking her, which meant Delphi, at the outer gate, had radioed ahead with something other than a security alert. They were walking her toward the hospitality house, where guests are housed when their status is indeterminate. And as she passed, the dry fountain, the one in the central courtyard, the ornamental one built over the original spring, the spring that had gone dry 40 years ago, and that my stonemasons had sealed over and converted into a decorative basin, the fountain began to run. Water, clear and cold, pushed up through the sealed stone as though the sealing had never happened. As though 40 years of dryness had been a temporary inconvenience the water had been waiting patiently to overcome. The guards stopped. The girl stopped. She looked at the fountain with an expression I could see, even from the tower window. Not surprise, recognition. She said something. I couldn't hear it from the height I was at. But I watched her lips, and it looked like she said, "There you are." I sat down on the floor of the North Tower. It is not something I do often. Sitting on the floor is not especially dignified for a queen. But there are moments when the body insists on a posture regardless of what the mind considers appropriate. And that was one of them. I sat on the cold stone and my serpents settled around my shoulders, and I thought about the last time I had seen that fountain run. It was the last day the only person I had ever loved was alive in this kingdom. She had stood at that fountain. She had cupped the water in both hands. She had laughed at something I said that I no longer remembered. Something ordinary and insignificant. And the light had come through the courtyard gate at the angle it comes through in late afternoon. And I had thought, this is the specific quality of good I want to keep. Not the grand things, not the kingdom, not the power, not the centuries. This, the particular way the water sounds when it moves through that basin. The way she laughs at ordinary things. She died 3 months later. The spring went dry the day I buried her. I had always thought that was grief. The land grieving alongside me. Or my grief, seeping into the land's chemistry and affecting it somehow. I had never investigated it too closely because it felt too close to something I was not ready to examine. I had sealed the fountain and turned it into something decorative and stopped looking at it. And now, a girl I had never seen was standing beside it, saying, "There you are," to the water returning to its source. And somewhere in the old archive, Sito was looking for a record she should have remembered immediately. I stood up. I smoothed my chitin. I settled my serpents into their usual arrangement, the careful posture of a person who is in control of things, even when she is not. And I went downstairs to find out what, exactly, had walked into my kingdom. What I did not do, and what I understand now, was the first of my errors. Was consider that the question might be answered from the inside, rather than the outside. I went looking for who sent her. I should have been asking what I had promised, and forgotten. The girl's name was Lyra. She told it to me herself, in the hospitality house, sitting across the low table with both hands wrapped around a cup of warm water, because she had refused tea. Refused food. Refused anything that had been through the kitchen's usual preparation, not from rudeness. She clarified quickly, looking up at me with dark eyes that were more composed than they had any right to be. But because she had been told to refuse any hospitality. She was actively offered until she had delivered what she was carrying. Then, she said, she would be glad of tea, told by whom? I asked. By the man who paid for my passage from Corinth. I kept my voice even. And what are you carrying? I don't know. She said it simply, without the performance of bewilderment that a trained liar would add. She just said it, looked at me, and waited. They gave me a bag. They told me to bring it to the Queen of the Mountain Kingdom. They paid my boat passage, my road lodging, my meals. They didn't tell me what was in the bag, and I didn't look. You didn't look. They paid well, she said, and I've learned not to ask questions that the money is already answering. She was, I revised upward, closer to 14. The composure wasn't the studied blankness of the traumatized. It was something more specific, the practical self-possession of a child who has been managing logistics for years, who has learned to read situations without letting situations read her. I looked at her and thought, she has been poor and careful and intelligent enough to survive being both. Where are your parents? I asked. Something moved in her face, swift and controlled. My mother died when I was 4. I don't know my father. She paused. I was told my grandmother might be somewhere in the Northern Territories. That was part of why I agreed to come. This is the Northern Territories. Your grandmother, I said. I was told her name once. I was very young. I don't remember it clearly. Abit. Something with an A, Ariadne, maybe, or Ariane. She tilted her head. Does that mean something to you? It meant, in the specific way, that the world had been rearranging itself since dawn. Everything. The name had been Areto, my Areto. And the woman who bore her grandchild would have been the daughter no one had told me existed, the daughter born 3 months after I buried her mother. The daughter of the woman I had loved, who had died never knowing she was carrying a life that would outlast her. I said, "Let me see the bag." She reached into the traveling cloak and produced it. Small, rough leather, sealed with a cord in a knot that required a specific pressure to release. I recognized the knot. I had taught it to Areto as a practical joke to centuries ago. A way of demonstrating that any mechanism, no matter how complex it appears, resolves to a single point of pressure if you understand its architecture. She had loved that demonstration. She had used that knot for everything afterward. My hands did not shake. I was careful about that. But when I worked the knot open and looked inside, and found the amber piece, the one I had carved from a piece of resin that washed up on the beach below the kingdom in our 2nd year together, carved into the rough shape of a serpent because Areto had laughed at how seriously I took the carving, and I had given it to her and told her it was a protection token, which was true, and also that the serpent would bite anyone else who held it, which was not true but which she had believed for 3 weeks before catching me on the inconsistency. When I found that piece of amber in a bag delivered by the granddaughter of the woman I had buried, I understood that the world had been doing something behind my back for a very long time. I closed my hand around the amber. "Is it what you were expecting?" the girl asked. "No," I said honestly. "It's something I thought was buried." I excused myself from the hospitality house before she could ask the next question. Sita was waiting for me in the corridor. She had the archive record, a single folded sheet of old parchment, the kind that predates the current paper supply by at least a century. Her expression was the one I had seen earlier, the complicated one, except now it was no longer trying to manage itself. She looked, for the first time in 40 years of working together, frightened. "The law of blood choice," she said, without preamble. I knew the law. Every ruler in these territories knows it. The way you know about structural faults in the ground you're building on, you know. You account for it in the abstract. You tell yourself it's ancient enough to be largely irrelevant in practice. The law of blood choice is an older piece of compact law, predating my rule, predating the kingdom as it currently exists. It states, in the archaic legal language of the original compact, that should a ruling sovereign's own bloodline recognize a successor indicated by the specific resonance of the foundation stones, responding to the successor's presence, the compact of sovereignty begins a 3-day transfer process. After 3 days, if the current sovereign does not formally either acknowledge the successor or formally dissolve the compact, the transfer completes automatically. I had never had a bloodline. The law had never applied. "She's not my bloodline," I said. "She is Areto's granddaughter," Sito said quietly. "And Areto was I know what Areto was." The compact doesn't distinguish between blood and bond, Sito said. The original language specifies those recognized by the sovereign's heart, not biological family. The people the sovereign has loved. She said the last word carefully. The way you say a word in front of someone who has never let themselves use it without flinching. I looked at the parchment. I looked at the amber in my hand. 3 days, I said. 3 days from when the stones first responded. This morning, she met my eyes. We have until tomorrow night. A beat of silence. I calculated. Who else knows? I asked. The people who sent her know, Sito said. That's why they sent her. They didn't create this. They found the law. They found the girl. They traced the bloodline back to Areto. And they weaponized what they found. The girl is innocent. She genuinely doesn't know any of this. But whoever sent her knew exactly what she would trigger when she touched that stone. The Senate of Thessaly, I said. I didn't phrase it as a question. Sito nodded. The Senate of Thessaly. A governing body I had watched assemble itself over the past 60 years from the ambition of men who had run out of kingdoms to acquire through conventional means and had begun looking at mine. They had tried trade sanctions, which I had weathered. They had tried diplomatic isolation, which had produced nothing except a period during which my kingdom had become surprisingly self-sufficient. They had tried 3 separate attempts at infiltrating my guard, all of which Sito had identified and neutralized. They were patient, organized, and possessed of the kind of institutional persistence that comes from not being mortal. Not in the sense that they were immortal, but in the sense that the organization outlasted any individual within it. I could outlast any single senator. I could not outlast the Senate itself. This was their 4th attempt. And unlike the others, this one didn't require any of their people to be inside my walls to work. They just needed the girl to arrive. Everything else was already in place. What are my options? I asked, though I already knew. 3, Sito said. She held up a finger for each. 1, remove the girl from the kingdom before sundown tomorrow. But the transfer has already begun. Removing her doesn't stop it. It only prevents the completion. The compact remains in active state, unresolved. The kingdom enters a kind of political limbo, vulnerable to any claim from anyone who can produce a blood choice candidate. 2, formally acknowledge the girl as successor. Transfer the compact of sovereignty to her willingly. You retain an advisory role. The Senate's proxy cannot legally take the kingdom. It goes to her, not to them. And 3, Sito looked at her hands. 3, dissolve the compact entirely. Sever the bond between yourself and the kingdom's stone. Medusa, she paused. She rarely uses my name. If you dissolve the compact, the kingdom doesn't just lose its sovereign. It loses the 3 centuries of accumulated resonance you've built into it. The defenses fail. Everything the stones recognize and respond to, all of it goes quiet. The Senate walks in without a battle. I walked to the window of the corridor. Outside, in the courtyard, I could hear the fountain. Still running. Still making the sound it had made in the last good year of my life. There is a 4th option you're not listing, I said. Sito was quiet. The girl, I said. If she were to die, within the walls, her death triggers automatic transfer, Sito said immediately. That's the trap, Medusa. That's why they sent her here rather than anywhere else. If she dies inside the kingdom before sundown tomorrow, the compact transfers to the nearest available legal claimant. The Senate already has someone ready. He's been in the city for 3 weeks. I turned away from the window. In my city, I said. In your city. Registered as a merchant from the eastern ports. His name is Procos. He has documentation establishing him as a distant legal heir to a pre-kingdom land claim that the compact law would recognize as the nearest available claimant in the event of a bloodline transfer failure. The trap had been in place before the girl arrived. The girl was not the weapon. The girl was the trigger mechanism. The weapon was the legal structure they'd spent years assembling around my walls. Around my laws, waiting for the moment when anyone, activated the blood choice compact so they could position themselves in the transfer window. They had found Areto's granddaughter and pointed her at my gates and waited. I stood there for a long moment. The amber was still in my hand. It was warm, not the warmth of my palm, which I would have expected after holding it this long, but the deeper warmth of something that has been waiting in the dark for a specific light to return to. I need to speak with the Oracle, I said. The Oracle is 3 days' travel. 1 day, if I move tonight. I looked at Sito. Bring the girl to the East Wing, the private quarters. Not the hospitality house. Post 2 of your most trusted guards, not the standard rotation. Tell no one else she's been moved. And if the Senate's man notices, he's been watching the hospitality house, I said. He expects either a banishment or an execution. He's not watching the East Wing because he can't imagine I would do anything other than remove her. What are you going to do? Sito asked. I thought about the sound of the fountain. I thought about the amber in my hand. I thought about a girl who had traveled from Corinth on behalf of people who had paid her not to ask questions, and who had looked at a running fountain and said, "There you are," with the ease of someone recognizing something she had only heard described. I'm going to find out, I said. What my kingdom knows that I don't. I left before dawn, alone, on the mountain road. I took nothing except the amber. My serpents tucked close in the cold, their warmth a practical thing, their alertness a constant counterpoint to my own thoughts, which were moving in ways I hadn't allowed them to move in a very long time. I had loved Areto for 11 years. I had buried her in the valley below the kingdom. I had sealed her spring and told myself it was grief, and never examined it further. I had not allowed myself to ask what she might have left behind, because the answer to that question felt like a direction I couldn't afford to look in if I wanted to keep standing. Now the answer was asleep in my East Wing, with dark eyes and a too large cloak and a knot that should not have existed. And I was walking through the night to ask someone else what I could not see myself. The Oracle lived in the cave at the peak of the second mountain. She was old, older than she looked, which is always the sign of something. And she had a habit of answering questions with a precision so specific it became its own kind of riddle. I had consulted her twice before. Once when I first claimed the kingdom, to ask whether it would hold. Once when Areto was sick, to ask whether she would recover. The first time, the Oracle had said yes. The second time, she had said something I had spent 40 years trying not to think about. She was awake when I arrived, which she never was, which meant she had been expecting me. 3 days is not enough time, she said, without turning from the fire. I'm not here about the 3 days, I said. I'm here about what came before them. She turned then. Her face in the firelight was the map of a very long life, and her eyes held the particular quality of someone who has seen the same shapes. Repeat enough times to recognize them immediately. She looked at me for a long moment. "You want to know what I told Areto," she said. My hands went still. "What?" She came to me. The oracle said, "In the last month of her life, after you had stopped asking me questions because you were afraid of the answers, she turned back to the fire. She was already sick. She knew it. She didn't come to ask me whether she would live. She came to ask me what would become of you when she was gone." I sat down on the cave floor, because it was that or fall. I told her, the oracle said, that you would outlast everything you built and be diminished by none of it and comforted by none of it, and that the loneliness would become a structure you mistook for strength, and that you would seal every door that opened onto something that could hurt you, until you had sealed yourself inside a kingdom of your own making with nothing living in it but your grief. The fire popped outside. The mountain wind moved. She asked what she could do. The oracle continued. I told her there was nothing, that the shape of your grief was as much a part of your nature as the serpent's, and that even she could not reach you past a certain point. A pause. She asked, "What about after me? What about after I'm gone? Is there nothing?" I could not speak. I told her there was one possibility. The oracle said, that if a piece of what she was could find you again, not her, not a replacement, not a ghost, but something genuinely hers, something that carried the specific frequency of her, the kingdom would recognize it. The kingdom is not just stone and law, Medusa. It is 3 centuries of you. And what you loved most, you built into it as surely as you built your own presence. Areto is in the foundation of your kingdom as surely as you are. If a piece of her returned, the kingdom would know. She knew, I said. She planned this. Not planned, the oracle said. She hoped. She gave the amber to her daughter and told her its history. She gave the knot to the daughter and taught her to teach it to her own children. She gave the name of this kingdom. She gave everything she could give through the ordinary channels of inheritance and love, and hoped that 40 years later it would still be enough to find you. The oracle finally looked at me fully. She didn't send the girl to replace you, she said. She sent her to remind you that you built something worth protecting. That you are not the only thing in this kingdom worth protecting. Abit. The girl doesn't know any of this. She is simply herself, Areto's granddaughter, who is curious and brave and looks at dry fountains with the certainty that the water is still there somewhere. That is Areto's gift, not a successor, a reminder. I sat with the amber in my hands until the fire had burned low. Then I stood up and walked back down the mountain in the dark and began to plan for the thing I had refused to plan for since the second morning of the Senate's trap. How to protect someone who didn't know they needed protecting. From people who needed them dead in a specific way, inside a kingdom that had already made its feelings clear. But I had not yet understood the full shape of the trap. There was a piece the oracle had not told me, not because she was hiding it, but because she didn't know it either. The Senate had not simply sent the girl here and trusted the law to do its work. They had a backup. And Procos, the Senate's proxy, had instructions that did not involve waiting. I returned to the kingdom in the last hour, before dawn, with ice on my sandals and something that felt. In the cavity where certainty used to live, like the beginning of a plan. The plan was not finished. Plans that involve 14-year-old girls who don't know they're in danger. Senate proxies who've been in your city for 3 weeks, and a legal transfer clock with less than 18 hours remaining are not the kind of plans that arrive finished. They arrive as outlines, incomplete, and requiring the kind of continuous adjustment that I have always found clarifying. In the way that imminent difficulty is clarifying, it burns away everything peripheral and leaves only the necessary. What was necessary? The girl had to remain alive and inside the walls until sundown, at which point the transfer window either closed through formal acknowledgement or the situation became considerably worse. What threatened that? The proxy procos, who had instructions I did not yet fully understand but whose presence in my city 3 weeks before the girl's arrival made it clear that this was not a plan that depended on any single mechanism. They had built redundancy into it. That was the Senate's particular institutional quality, not brilliance, but redundancy. If the girl triggered the law and I removed her, legal limbo. If I executed her, automatic transfer. If I acknowledged her, the Senate had a counterclaim ready. If nothing at all happened by sundown, the Senate argued that my failure to act was itself a form of implicit acknowledgement and filed for the transfer through the Eastern courts. Every path, as I walked it in my mind on the road back, bent toward the same destination, except one, the one path they hadn't accounted for, because it required me to be something I had not been in 40 years, something I had very deliberately stopped being, and something the Senate had presumably concluded was no longer a relevant variable when calculating my behavior, was love. Not the romantic kind. Not even the familial kind. Exactly. The specific kind that exists between a person and something that belongs to someone they loved. The kind that is neither obligation nor affection, but something in between, more durable than both. Recognition. If I formally adopted the girl, not as successor, not under the blood choice compact, but under the older adoption law that predates the compact entirely and supersedes it in certain provisions, the transfer process would halt. Adoption under the old law creates a new legal category that the blood choice compact's authors hadn't anticipated because adoption was considered a matter for families, not kingdoms. It creates what the legal language calls a sovereign interlude, a pause in the transfer, while the legal status of the new relationship is assessed. The assessment takes 30 days. 30 days, during which Procos's claim would be invalid. The transfer window would be suspended, and I would have time to dismantle whatever structure the Senate had been building in the Eastern courts for the past 60 years. The problem was that adopting the girl, even technically, even for legal purposes, was a thing I could not undo. The old adoption law, once enacted, created a bond that the kingdom recognized and encoded into the stones the same way it had encoded my sovereignty. I would not just be granting her legal protection. I would be letting her in. And I did not know, standing on the road with ice on my sandals and the amber in my hand and less than 18 hours before the world changed permanently in one direction or another, whether I was capable of that anymore. I was still deciding when I reached the east wing and found the guard post empty. Both guards gone, the door to the girl's room standing open. The room inside, when I crossed the threshold, showed signs of a hasty departure rather than a struggle. The blanket had been pushed back, not thrown. The cup was on the table, not broken on the floor. She had left quickly but not in panic, which meant someone had given her warning rather than force. I went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. She went to the fountain, said a voice behind me. I turned. It was Morrow, one of my younger guards, 22, stationed in the West Corridor. He looked frightened but deliberate. The particular combination of someone who has done something they're not sure was right and is committed to it regardless. "She heard the water," he said. "She asked me if she could go and sit by it for a while. She couldn't sleep. I thought it was safe. It's inside the inner walls. I went with her." I looked at him for a long moment. "Where is she now?" "Still there. At the fountain. I came to tell you because..." He stopped. Because there's a man in the courtyard," he said. "He came in through the service gate. He's standing at the far end of the courtyard behind the column. He's been there for maybe 10 minutes. He hasn't moved. He's watching her." I was through the door before he finished the sentence. "The courtyard in the hour before dawn is the darkest place in the kingdom, enclosed on 3 sides by high walls. The eastern wall unlit at that hour, the only light the ambient glow of the city beyond the western parapet. The fountain in the center made its sound, consistent and unhurried. The sound that had been missing for 40 years, and was now simply present again, as though it had always been. The girl was sitting at its edge, with her knees drawn up and one hand trailing in the water. She was watching the surface. I did not see Procos until he moved. He came from behind the eastern column with the particular economy of motion that indicates professional training, not military, which is precise and directional, but something older and more adaptive. The kind of movement that has been optimized for small spaces and limited windows. He had something in his hand. He was not moving toward me. He was moving toward the girl. I am not, contrary to certain myths that have accumulated around me over the centuries, primarily a creature of violence. I have outlasted empires without direct combat, because the kinds of threats empires represent are generally better managed through intelligence than force. I am not untrained in force. I am trained specifically in the kind of force appropriate to my body's particular qualities, the serpent's. The speed that comes from 3 centuries of a reflexive system that has been continuously refined. The specific, terrible quality of my gaze when I choose to use it. I rarely choose to use it. It is the kind of weapon that cannot be calibrated once deployed. What I did when I crossed the courtyard in 6 strides was something simpler. I put myself between Procos and the girl, and I let the serpents rise. Stopped. He was good. I registered that even in the moment. Most people, confronted with my full presence in darkness, become physiologically incapable of forward motion. The body's threat response, systems overriding conscious intent. Procos stopped, but he did not retreat. He adjusted. He shifted his grip on the thing in his hand, reassessing, calculating something. "This doesn't work for you," he said. His voice was even. He had clearly been briefed on me. "She dies in these walls. The transfer activates." "You know that." "I know that," I said. "You're going to have to come through me first." "I'm prepared for that," he said. "You're prepared for me," I said. "You're not prepared for the kingdom." He frowned. He opened his mouth to say something else. And then the stones of the eastern wall, the old stones, the foundation stones, the ones that carry the accumulated resonance of my presence multiplied across 3 centuries, began to glow. Not the amber of the second gate. This was something older, something that does not have a color in the visible spectrum. That registers as light only because the eye needs something to put in the category. The entire east wall of the courtyard came alive, and the sound it made was the sound I had heard through my feet that morning. The deep resonance of something very old remembering something very specific. Procos took one step back, then two. The girl had stood up from the fountain. She was not running. She was standing very still, watching the wall. And her expression, I could see it clearly in the light the stones were producing, was not fear. It was the same expression she'd had at the second gate, at the fountain. The look of recognizing something she had only heard described. "It's warm," she said, quietly, not to me, to the wall. "It feels like when she used to hold my hands." And I understood, in that moment, with the specific comprehension of someone who has been protecting themselves from a truth that the whole world has been trying to deliver for 40 years, exactly what was happening. Areto had put her warmth into this girl. Not metaphorically, not sentimentally. Through the amber, through the knot. Through the particular way she had described this kingdom to a daughter who described it to this child. Through all of it, she had given something to this girl that carried her frequency. And the kingdom, which was built from my love, for Areto as surely as from stone and labor, was recognizing it. It wasn't choosing a successor. It was recognizing family. Procos had taken 3 more steps back. He was calculating escape routes. I could see the assessment happening in his posture. I took 1 step toward him, and the wall brightened, and he turned and ran. He hit the service gate at speed, and the gate did not open. He tried twice more. The gate, I noted, was no longer interested in letting him through. I looked at the girl. She was looking at me. In the light of the glowing stones, her face was open in a way it had not been in the hospitality house. The practical composure had softened into something younger, something closer to what she probably was when no one was watching. She looked, in the specific quality of the light, so much like Areto that my breath left me. "Who are you?" she asked. Not rudely, genuinely. "My name is Medusa," I said. "This is my kingdom." "It doesn't feel like just your kingdom," she said, with the directness of a child who has not yet learned to soften true things. "No," I agreed. "I'm beginning to understand that." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "The man who ran, he was going to hurt me." "Yes. Why?" I pulled my chitin closer against the cold. The serpents settled. Behind us, the fountain continued its patient sound. "Because hurting you here would have given something important to people who don't deserve it," I said. "And because they knew that protecting you would cost me something." I looked at her. "It will. I want to be clear about that. What I'm about to do will change things I cannot change back." She met my eyes steadily. She was Areto's granddaughter. She had been traveling alone for weeks, on behalf of people who hadn't told her the whole truth. And she had done it calmly and practically, and with her eyes open. She was not unafraid. I could see the fear underneath the composure, correctly calibrated to the situation's actual danger, but she was managing it. "Is it the right thing?" she asked. I looked at the amber in my hand. I looked at the fountain. I looked at the girl. "I think," I said, "that it was always the right thing. I was just very late to arrive at it." What happened next took 20 minutes and involved the specific invocation of the old adoption law. A formal verbal declaration that the kingdom is required to witness and encode. And the sensation, physical, unmistakable, of the compound resonance in the stones shifting as the legal structures realigned around a new relationship. It felt like the exact opposite of building a wall. It felt like the ceiling I had put over the spring dissolving into nothing, like water finding its level, like the sound of a door opening that has been closed for 40 years. But I had not yet told her what it meant. And before I could, Sito came running across the courtyard with the face of someone who has just discovered that the situation has developed a new dimension. "Prokos is gone," she said, breathing hard. "He didn't leave through any gate. He's just gone. The Eastern Wall let him through somehow." She looked at me. "And the Senate filed papers in the Eastern courts 40 minutes ago. Emergency petition. They're claiming the adoption is invalid under the Blood Choice Compact's superseding clause." "Is it?" I asked. "That depends," Sito said carefully, "on whether the compact or the old adoption law takes precedence in a contested transfer scenario. The Eastern courts will take 30 days to rule." She paused. "Prokos isn't the main move. Medusa. He was the distraction. The main move is the legal challenge. They want you in court, away from the kingdom, during the 30-day review period." I looked at the girl, who was listening to this, with the expression of someone building a mental map of a city they've just arrived in, noting streets, exits, the placement of things. "If you leave," she said slowly, "the kingdom is unguarded during the review period." "Yes," I said. "And if you stay," she said, "the legal challenge goes unanswered and they win by default." Also yes. She thought about this. She was, I was realizing, considerably more strategic than a 14-year-old should be, which made sense if I considered the source. "Then we both go," she said. "You're a child," I said. "I'm your legal daughter now," she said. "Aren't I?" She looked at me steadily. "That means the kingdom isn't unguarded while you're away. It means a sovereign is still present." She paused. "I don't know what I'm doing, but I could learn." And she looked at the wall, still faintly glowing. "And I think the kingdom would help." The stones gave off a warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature. I had been so certain, for so long, that what I had built was mine alone. That the control I maintained over it was the only thing keeping it whole. That any crack in that control was not a window, it was a flaw. What it actually was, I was beginning to understand, was Areto's work. The warmth in the stones was not just mine. The water in the fountain was not just mine. The resonance in the eastern wall that had stopped Prokos was not just mine. It was older than my rule. It was what had been here before me, and what had recognized me when I arrived. And what had been waiting for 40 years for me to stop, sealing things shut long enough to notice it. I looked at the girl, my daughter, under the law. Areto's granddaughter, by blood. A child who had come to me carrying a knot I taught someone to centuries ago, and an amber piece I carved on a beach on a good afternoon, and a look in her eyes that I recognized from the only face I had ever been fully prepared to stop being strong for. "The Eastern courts open at noon," I said. "I know," she said, with the ease of someone who had done her research on the journey over. "The petition was filed at midnight, which means the first hearing dates 5 days we have Chimi. We had Chimi." The courtyard was beginning to lighten, not dawn yet. But the early intimation of it, the sky deciding in advance what direction it intended to go. The serpents were still, warm against my shoulders. The fountain made its sound, and the girl sat at its edge again, her feet not quite touching the water, looking at the brightening sky with the specific quality of attention of someone who is learning, for the first time, that this might be a place worth the attention. The cost of what I had done was still arriving. I could feel it at the edges, not loss, exactly, but the specific vulnerability of having opened something that I had been protected by keeping closed. The part of me that had been a kingdom unto itself, that had needed nothing and acknowledged nothing, and sealed every door that opened onto pain. That part was aware that it had been compromised. That there was now a person inside the walls who mattered in a way that made the walls thinner. I had not yet fully reckoned with what the Senate would do with that knowledge. That reckoning would come. The Eastern courts at noon smell like old stone and bureaucratic patience, the particular combination of dust and procedural calm that accumulates in places where enormous things are decided at the speed of ink drying. I had not been to a court in 40 years. I had not needed to. My kingdom's legal standing had been sufficiently unambiguous that no one with functional judgment had attempted to challenge it in open forum. The Senate's emergency petition had changed that, and I walked into the Eastern courts with Sito at my left, a stack of legal documentation at my right, and the awareness that I was doing something I had not done since before. Areto died, trusting someone with my kingdom while I was not in it. Lyra was back in the mountain. She was learning the boundary stones from a god named Delphi, who had taken to the assignment with the serious competence she applied to everything. The serpents had accepted the girl completely. 2 of the eldest had transferred to her by the time I left, which was without precedent in the history of my rule and which I was choosing, for sanity purposes, to regard as entirely normal. The fountain was running. The eastern wall had returned to its ordinary appearance. The kingdom was different. Not weaker. I kept waiting for the sensation of diminishment I had been bracing for. The feeling of having given something away that left me smaller. It hadn't come. What had come instead was something harder to categorize, a kind of structural change, like a building that has been widened rather than added to. The load-bearing walls were where they'd always been. There was simply more internal space. The court session took for hours. The Senate's legal team was prepared, professional, and working from a genuinely sophisticated argument about the superseding clause. I will give them this. They had done their reading. They had found provisions I had not found, and they deployed them with the confidence of people who had been building this particular argument for longer than this particular girl had been alive. I had Sito. Sito had been doing her reading for 40 years. She had been anticipating this challenge since before the Senate had formally constituted itself, and she presented a counter-argument of such specific and layered precision that the presiding legal officers went very quiet in the way legal officers go quiet when they encounter work of exceptional quality. She cited the pre-compact adoption law's primacy clause. She cited 3 instances of blood choice, transfer failures in other kingdoms, and the legal outcomes in each. She cited, at the end, the specific language of the original compact's preamble, language that the Senate's team had not read carefully enough, which stated that the compact exists in service to the kingdom's life, not the kingdom's structure. The old adoption law, Sito argued, was an expression of the kingdom's life. The blood choice compact was an expression of its structure. When they came into conflict, the preamble was unambiguous. The courts suspended the Senate's petition pending full review. 30 days, but the suspension meant no action could be taken in the interim, no legal transfer, no proxy claim, no further emergency petitions from the same party on the same grounds. We won the first round. I would not call it a victory. Victories are things that end. What I had won was 30 days and a modified legal landscape. The Senate would adapt. They always adapted. Procos had disappeared from the city entirely, not fled, Sito believed, but been recalled and redeployed to whatever the next phase of their strategy was. There was always a next phase. I had learned, in 3 centuries, that institutions don't concede. They evolve. But I had also learned, in the last 2 days, something I had not known I'd forgotten. I returned to the mountain in the late afternoon. When the light was coming through the eastern courtyard gate, at the angle it comes through in that season, in that hour, the fountain was running in its basin. Lyra was standing beside it with Delphi, listening to something Delphi was explaining. She had taken off the too large traveling cloak and was wearing one of the apprentice guard's tunics, which was also too large, and she was listening with the focused, note-taking quality of someone who understands that what they don't know is finite and addressable. She saw me come through the gate. She did not run to me. She wasn't the type. And I was not the type to receive running, but she lifted her chin in the small acknowledging gesture that I had, started to recognize as her version of welcome, and I returned it. And it was. In the particular register of 2 people who are figuring out the grammar of a relationship in real time, enough. I sat down at the fountain. I let the serpents rest. The water made its sound. Seto settled beside me and gave me the full debrief, in the even tone that means. The news is manageable, but the picture is larger than we've been seeing it. The Senate's petition was one of 7 actions they'd filed across for different jurisdictions in the past year. All of them contingent on a blood choice activation in my kingdom. They'd built a legal architecture around me like a net, tightening it gradually, waiting for the trigger. The trigger had come. We had, for now, slipped the net. But the net was still there, and Procos. I asked. We believe he's been sent to the northern tributary kingdoms, Sito said. The same legal approach, different terrain. The Senate is not focused solely on you. You were the most valuable target because of your age and the blood choice provisions. But there are others. I was quiet for a moment. How many? For other kingdoms with similar vulnerabilities. 3 of them have no one in place with the legal knowledge to respond the way we did today. She looked at me. They won't have a Lyra, either. I looked at the girl, my daughter, under the law, who is currently being taught the difference between the boundary stones. Resonance, frequencies with the seriousness of someone who intends to pass a test. She would pass the test. That was already clear. I'll send the legal documentation to the other 3 kingdoms, I said, with Sito's brief. It will take time to reach them, but it will reach them faster if someone goes in person, Sito said. She was not looking at me when she said it. Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? I'm suggesting, Sito said carefully, that the legal argument alone may not be sufficient for kingdoms that have spent decades isolated from each other by deliberate Senate policy. Someone they trust would need to deliver it. She finally looked at me. You've been in this mountain for 40 years, Medusa. 40 years since Oreto died, and you sealed the spring and decided that the safest thing to be was unreachable. She said it gently, in the tone of someone who has been waiting the appropriate amount of time to say a true thing. The world kept moving. The Senate kept building. And you were very protected in here, and very alone. I thought about what the Oracle had said. The loneliness as a structure, the sealed doors, The kingdom, I said, if I leave, will be here, Ceto said. With Delphi. With the Eastern Wall. With a girl who the stones already know, and who has been paying very close attention since the moment she arrived. She paused. She is not a replacement. I want to be clear about that. She is not what I'm suggesting. What I'm suggesting is that you might, now, be able to be into places without being in neither. The fountain ran. The light came through the courtyard gate at the late afternoon angle. Lyra, across the courtyard, had picked up one of the boundary stones and was holding it the way you hold something to feel its specific weight. The way Areto used to hold things, she was trying to understand completely. I thought, this is the specific quality of good I want to keep. Not only this. That was what was different. For 40 years I had been trying to contain what I wanted to keep, to the absolute minimum, small enough to fit inside sealed stone, narrow enough not to require openness, light enough not to add weight to a loss I had already survived. The amber, the fountain, the memory of a particular afternoon. Things that could not be taken because they did not exist outside my own interior. But the girl was real. And Ceto was real. And Delphi, at the North Gate, was real. And the guards who had served this kingdom for decades were real. And the people in the city below who had built their lives in the space this kingdom provided. All of it was real. And I had been in here for 40 years managing it from the inside of a sealed room and calling it sovereignty. It was sovereignty. It was also a kind of poverty. When would I leave? I asked. When Lyra is ready, Ceto said. Which, at current pace, is approximately 3 weeks. I looked at the amber in my palm. I thought about the letter the oracle had told me Areto wrote, the one she said was carried in the girl's blood. In the inheritance she had passed down. I had not found it yet. I wasn't sure I was supposed to yet. Some things arrive when you stop going looking for them. There's something else, Ceto said. I looked at her. In the archive review, she said, when I was searching for the blood choice records, I found something adjacent. A second document, filed in the same period as the original compact. It's a rider clause, added by the compact's original drafter. She held out a single-folded sheet. I don't know who the drafter was. The signature has been removed. But the clause itself is. She stopped. I took the sheet. Read it. The rider clause stated, in the event that a sovereign with no biological heir forms a legal bond of adoption with a person recognized by the kingdom's stones, the compact of sovereignty becomes shared. Not transferred, shared, to sovereigns, one kingdom. The stones will hold both, to sovereigns, one kingdom. I had been asking the wrong question from the beginning. The law of blood choice wasn't a transfer mechanism. It was a recognition mechanism. It wasn't about who would rule after me. It was about whether I would let anyone rule alongside me. Whether I would stop being the only thing the kingdom held. The only presence it answered to, the only authority it could carry. The Senate had found it and tried to weaponize it. They had not understood what they found. They thought it was a structural vulnerability. It was the original drafter's understanding that a sovereign who rules entirely alone, for centuries, with no one to answer to and nothing to be accountable to, eventually becomes a kingdom unto themselves, and that this is not strength. It is a particular kind of diminishment. The drafter had built a door into the compact, not a weakness, a door. The girl was the key to the door. Areto had known this, somehow, the way Areto had always known the shapes of things before they fully arrived. She had spent her last months preparing something that might, 40 years later, find the door and open it. I folded the parchment. I looked at Lyra. She had set down the boundary stone and was looking at me across the courtyard with the expression of someone waiting for a verdict, though she was to compose to show the waiting openly. "Come here," I said. She crossed the courtyard with her characteristic unhurried directness. She stopped in front of me. The light was behind her. The fountain was between us. "There's something I should have told you earlier," I said. "About why you came here. About what you carried, and what it did, and whose idea it was." She sat down across from me, at the edge of the fountain. "I thought there might be," she said. I told her. Not everything. There was time for everything. And 3 weeks was enough time to learn how to have conversations that moved slowly rather than efficiently. But the essential things, the amber, and who carved it and for whom, the spring, and why it had dried, the letter that existed somewhere in the inheritance she carried, that would probably find her when she was ready for it in the same way the amber had found me when I was ready. She listened in the particular way she listened to everything, completely, without interrupting, with the specific quality of attention that feels like the thing being said is being put somewhere careful. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "So she planned this," she said. "My grandmother, the whole thing." "She hoped," I said. "She couldn't plan. She could only create conditions." Lyra looked at the fountain. "She must have trusted you a lot," she said. "To leave something this important to, I mean, you could have just killed me or sent me away." "I almost did," I said honestly. "But you didn't." She looked at me. "Why?" I thought about the amber in my hand, warm beyond the warmth of my palm. I thought about the stone with the inscription that had appeared from beneath the surface when she touched it. I thought about the fountain, running for the first time in 40 years, and her looking at it and saying, "There you are." "Because the kingdom didn't," I said. "And I've learned, slowly, to trust what the kingdom knows." She nodded. She pulled her knees to her chest. She looked at the courtyard, the walls, the late light coming through the gate. She looked at it the way I had looked at it once. "A long time ago, Widia tem someone's weather a place worth caring about. It's a good kingdom," she said. "Yes," I said. "It is." The evening settled around us. The serpents drifted, some to my shoulders, 2 of the eldest remaining at her side with a settled patience that made me think. They'd been waiting for a specific weight distribution for 40 years, and had finally arrived at it. Delphi lit the courtyard torches. Sito went to make arrangements for the morning briefing. The city below the mountain went through its ordinary evening sounds, the market stalls closing, the lamplighters on their routes, the particular hum of a community doing the small domestic things that make a place a home. I had built all of this. I had been protecting it, alone, for centuries. I had been so certain that protection was the same thing as possession, that to protect something was to contain it, seal it, prevent it from being touched by anything I couldn't control. What Areto had understood, and had spent her dying months trying to give me, was that the opposite is true. The thing that protects a kingdom is not the size of its walls or the depth of its ceiling. It is the number of people who love it enough to stand in front of it. She had spent 40 years sending me one. I was not yet done with the Senate. The legal challenge would resume in 30 days. And Procos was in the northern tributaries. And there were 3 other kingdoms without the knowledge they needed to survive, what was coming. There was work. There was always work. But there was also this, the fountain, running, the girl at my side, the amber in my pocket, worn smooth from decades of being held by someone who knew what it was worth. The stones of the eastern wall, holding to frequencies now instead of one, resonating in the particular combination that the original drafter of the compact had written a rider clause to protect. 2 sovereigns, 1 kingdom. The stars came out over the mountain. The serpents settled. And I understood, fully, for the first time in 3 centuries, that I was not the only thing that lived in this place. That was the thing Areto had been trying to tell me. Not from the grave, from the life she'd lived alongside me. From every morning she'd stood at that fountain and laughed at something ordinary. From the specific warmth she'd put into an amber piece as a joke about serpents that was never really a joke. The kingdom was mine, but it was also hers. And now it was Lyra's, and that was not a diminishment. It was, after 40 years of sealed springs and sealed doors, the beginning of something I no longer had a word for because I had spent too long refusing to need one. She had known I would arrive at it eventually. She had just known it would take a very long time. But she had known. 3 weeks later, when Lyra had learned the boundary stones and Delphi had declared her ready, I left the mountain for the first time in 40 years. Sito gave me a travel kit. Lyra gave me no ceremony, which was correct. We were not ceremonial people. She just walked me to the outer gate and stood there with 2 of the eldest serpents at her shoulders while the gate opened. And she looked at me with Areto's dark eyes and said, "I'll be here when you get back." I had no reason to doubt her. In the Eastern courts, 3 months after that day, the Senate's petition was dismissed in full. The legal brief Sito had prepared was adopted as precedent in 2 of the northern tributary kingdoms before year's end. Procos was recalled by the Senate permanently, which meant they had lost confidence in the direct approach and were reconfiguring. That was more dangerous in some ways and less dangerous in others. I was still working on the distinction. What I knew, the kingdom was different. Not smaller, different. There was water in the fountain and to frequencies in the stones, and a girl at the northern gate who checked the boundary stones every morning with the seriousness of someone who has been trusted with something valuable and intends to be worthy of it. She found the letter 2 months after I left. The one Areto had written. The one that existed in the inheritance of blood and memory that Lyra had been carrying her whole life without knowing it. It came to her the way the amber had come to me, not all at once, not in a moment of dramatic revelation, but slowly, in fragments. In the way things arrive, when you have finally stopped sealing the doors long enough to receive them. She wrote to tell me what it said. I will tell you this much. Areto had known about the compact. She had known about the rider clause. She had known. In the specific way, she knew things. Through the archive, she had spent 11 years reading in my library. Through conversations with Sito's predecessor. Through the particular kind of attention she paid to everything, that the door existed. And she had understood something I had not, that the door could only be opened from the outside. She could not have known she would die before she opened it herself. She planned for that possibility anyway. She left a granddaughter who carried the knot and the amber and the name of the Mountain Kingdom and the instruction to go there and bring what she was carrying. The rest she left to the kingdom. The kingdom, as it turned out, had been holding the rest all along. What I still don't know, what I am still learning. In the way that people 3 centuries old still have things to learn, which turns out to be the condition rather than the exception, is what it means to build something that does not depend entirely on me to stand. Not because I doubt my own endurance, but because endurance alone is not the same as living. And Areto, who always understood things I was still arriving at, had spent her last months trying to give me the only thing she could, a way to eventually stop carrying it alone. I am still not certain I'm capable of it, but the kingdom is, and for now, that is enough. She was wrong about one thing, Areto. The loneliness didn't become a structure I couldn't leave. It became a structure with a door. Someone just had to come and show me where it was. If this story reached your heart, leave us a like and share it. What would you have done? And don't miss what comes next. Another memory Medusa never forgot.